Good morning and welcome to the Daily Tanya. Today is Monday, the 19th day of Shvat. Let's begin with Tzedakah. The Daily Tzedakah, Shemekareves is a Geula. Tzedakah brings Mashiach closer. So we continue chapter 23. It's a short lesson today. Alter Rebbe adds another point in what happens when we do a mitzvah, when we perform a mitzvah. A commandment of God we mentioned yesterday, that the whole world, the sustenance of the world depends on the fulfillment of the mitzvahs. Because the mitzvahs is the inner will of God, meaning that God created the world for the purpose of fulfilling his will. The purpose that so a Jew should put on tefillin, should study Torah, should do the mitzvahs, the commandments that God commanded us. Everything else is external part of his will. Just like when you go to work, you don't necessarily want to go to work, but you want to get up and go to work because you want to make a living and you want to have ability to do what you want to do. So Alter Rebbe now continues in saying that the mitzvahs, he said in the beginning of the chapters, that the mitzvahs are called the Amarim, the Malka, the organs of the king, the limbs of the king. So the Alter Rebbe explains, why is it called an organ? What is the definition of an organ? So yesterday we spoke a little bit about it, that an organ draws a certain type of energy. If the soul has ability to see, the organ reveals that ability of seeing. The power of seeing is drawn through the organs. So each organ has a different function and draws a different type of light from Hashem. That's why many different mitzvahs. We connect to God through many mitzvahs because each mitzvah draws a different type of energy, just like every organ draws a different type of energy of the soul, and the ability of walking, doing something with the hands, drawing. So that is drawn through the organs. But then there is another aspect of the organ, and that is the fact that the organ is completely nullified to the soul. What is it? It doesn't have its own will. All the organs do automatically whatever the person wants to do. They say this teacher calls up the father of his student and says, "Mr. Schwartz, I have a problem with your son." "What's the problem?" "He wants to punch me in my face." So ask him, "How do you know that?" The father asks the teacher, "How do you know he wants to punch you in your face?" He says, "Because he punched me in my face." When you want to do something, automatically does. What you do is an expression of your will. So if you want to pick up this phone, you don't have to command the hand to go pick up the phone, and there's no process there. It's automatically. The hand automatically picks up and does your will. So when we're talking about the mitzvahs, so the truth is that everything in what happens in the world is God's will, except that some of the things, God's will is hidden. You don't see, it's not really acting, because as we learned yesterday, there is the contractions of God's will. So things that are happening in the world sometimes can go even against Hashem's will. But when you do a mitzvah, the power, the energy that does that mitzvah, the act of the doing of the mitzvah is nullified, is one. It is an expression of oneness with God. Just like the organ is one with Hashem's will. Being that Hashem, God, really truly wants that thing to be done, and you are doing it, you're using your energy to do it, so you become the mitzvahs, the commandments, God's commandments become the organs of Hashem's and the organ of the king. So let's see this inside. Says the Alter Rebbe, Velochein nikroim evre de malke. This is why, hence, the mitzvahs are figuratively described as organs of the king. K'moi she'evrei gufa adam heim levush lenafshay ubetelim legamra eleha mikol v'chol. For just as the organs of a human body are a garment for its soul and are completely and utterly surrendered to it. Why is it a garment for the soul? Because the soul expresses itself through the body, through the organs. But it's one with the soul. It's completely surrendered to the will of the person. Kimiyad she'oile birtzoinoi shel odom lifshoit yodoi ragloi, hein nishmois lirtzoinoi teikef umiyad, bli shum tzivui v'amira lehenu bli shum she'iyah klal. As is evident from the fact that as soon as a person desires to stretch out his hand or foot, they obey his will immediately, without any command or instructions to them, and with no delay whatsoever. You want to pick up your hand, you pick up your hand. It goes immediately, automatically. But at the very instant that it enters his will to do so. And the response of his organs is automatic. One need not consciously occupy himself with activating his hand. If you do, you need to see a doctor. As to the phrase without any command or instruction, when one must exert effort in activating his faculties, meaning when one dislikes a particular task but forces himself to do it on the strength of logic, this effort is spoken of as an internal command from one faculty to another. However, when one's will activates the organ of his body, there is no such command involved. So when you're doing something against your will, then you need to command. You need to convince yourself that to do it. But once you're convinced and you decide to do it, you pick it up. The actual connection between the will and the action is automatic. So similarly, says the Alter Rebbe, is the acts of the mitzvahs. The act of the mitzvahs and the doing of the mitzvahs is something which is completely surrendered to the will of Hashem. The will of God is enclosed in this very act of the mitzvah. Kach derech moshel. Achayus shel ma'aseh hamitzvahs v'kiyuman ubatel legamre legabe rotzen ha'elyon ha'melubash b'hem. Just as the organs of the human body are completely united with one's soul and are surrendered to it, so too is the life force animating the performance and fulfillment of commandments. They're completely surrendered to the divine will. The divine will which is clothed therein, in the act. And this life force becomes, in relation to the divine will, like a body to a soul. And that's the lesson of today. And when we do a mitzvah, we become, the act that we do is become completely nullified to Hashem's will. We are the organ, we become the organs of Hashem, the act of our mitzvahs. And certain tzaddikim, that by them every act is in a revealed way that way. They say the Alter Rebbe, they say in the name of the Alter Rebbe, that he said about his teacher, the Mezritcher Magid, that any movement that he would do, any movement would be an expression of God's will. And by him it would be open that way. And he said to the point that there was once that he moved his hand to his back. For whatever reason it was obviously a godly act. But since he didn't feel that he needs to move his hand back, forward, again, back to the normal position, he didn't feel that there was a godly mission there, so he kept his hand like this for 2 hours in his bag. That's something to say about Mezritcha Magid, the holy tzaddik. But for the rest of us, we realize that whenever we have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, that act we become united with Hashem, as we said, and we'll continue, Mirz Hashem. The Alter Rebbe will continue tomorrow to explain further. Have a wonderful day.